And I'm like, it's outside the window. It's outside the window. So I get out of bed, I go over to the window, and I look out the window, and it's standing right out the back, right in the backyard, not far away from my window, and it wants me to go outside. I don't know. Sometimes I can hear the words in my head. Its mouth, it's not moving its mouth, but I can hear the words in my head. But most of the time, it's when this happened, it was mostly like a knowing, like I have to go outside. I need to go outside, and I don't know why, because these things weren't pleasant for me. I don't know what happens, but I know I get anxious and I don't like it. But it was when I saw it outside, I was like, I have to go out there. And what would happen then is I would black out. I don't remember what happens after that. But while we lived there, my mother she would intercept me trying to get out the door in the middle of the night. She would find me fidgeting with the door. She'd be watching TV. She'd walk right past her and try to walk out the door, And she would tell me, do you know you tried to walk out of the house last night? And those are the nights that I had these weird experiences where these things wanted me to come out. She'd find me in weird places in the house, find me in the bathroom. She'd find me here or there, while all this is going on.
Well, I got to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Shane, a lot of people I've talked to on the show that have been abducted, some of the things they've said, like the Greys would walk into their bedroom right through the walls. I had one guy who said he was looking out his bedroom window and he saw like 3 Greys coming right towards his bedroom window. Next thing he knew, they were in his bedroom. Now, have you encountered that where they just walk right through the walls and walk right through the glass and come right in?
I haven't seen them do that, but I'll tell you what, that was another thing I wanted to talk about, which is happening more in my later years now, from my 20s up until present. But before I get into that, one other thing that happened in Texas was, I remember one night clearly waking up. They're here again. They're here again. I see them briefly, and the next thing you know, I'm levitating in the air. I'm on my back facing the ceiling, and I'm trying to look below me, but I can't. And I'm floating. I'm floating down the hallway. I'm floating into the living room where I see my mother and her boyfriend at the time in suspended animation. And the TV, which back then we didn't have DVRs, where I'm talking, it was like 79. I don't know what year it was. In suspended animation.
So everything was froze.
Everything was froze. Yeah. And that's another thing I never wanted to bring up. Now, like I said, I've been doing the paranormal thing, lecturing and doing shows on the paranormal and these negative haunts, but I've been dealing with the other thing longer. I just didn't want to come forward with it because some of these things to me sounded silly. Like people would think I'm goofy, but I got to say it the way it is, and this is what happened to me, 100%. And so everything was frozen. My mother, her boyfriend, totally frozen like mannequins, and the TV was frozen as well. And then here's what happened at that point. So we get to the front of the building. It was a big apartment building in San Antonio, like garden style. No, that was not even a garden style, but it was a big apartment building, anyways. So we get to where the door is. To go out the front where the parking lot was, and there's a series of windows on that same wall. I don't know which direction I went, but all of a sudden, it was like I'm being sucked through a vacuum, or almost like that sensation, or like a giant bungee cord was pulled really tight and just, hooked onto me, and I go just through the air, and I black out. I don't know what happens. I just wake up the next day. So
now, have you had any? And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I need to ask you questions here too. Now, have you ever woke up in a UFO or being examined or anything like that? Do you any vague memories of that?
I don't have memories of that, but you know what? I have no doubt that if I did like a regression type of hypnosis or whatever, that's probably something that will come out, because I know I get taken, because I've woken up, I've gone to bed with clothes on, woken up with no clothes on. I've woken up with grass in my feet. It makes no sense. I've gone to bed with, socks and clothes. I wake up barefoot, grass stuck to my toes and in my bed, dirt, stuff like that. Woken up with different clothes on, my clothes on backwards. This has happened my whole life, and it happens a lot. So there's no doubt in my mind. I know, there's a lot of people that believe that, they make us forget these things. And I know there's certain things that when I talk about most of the time, it's really hard for me I start to get cloudy, and my brain starts to shut off, and it's just all of a sudden it's hard for me to talk. It's hard for me to remember, even though 5 minutes ago I had the thought in my head to share it. But when I actually try to do so, something happens. And so I don't remember waking up in a craft, but I'm almost for sure that's what happens. But I do not recall.
Oh, one
yes,
thing, Shane, a lot of reports have been where people, like you mentioned, you woke up, you had grass on your feet. A lot of times too, like you said, you were dressed when you had something on when you went to bed. You woke up and you weren't. Excuse me, it's from a cigar, folks. I'm sorry, I coughed in the microphone. But what's interesting too, it's been a lot of reports of people going to bed with pajamas on, and all of a sudden when they wake up, their pajamas, the buttons, everything is backwards on them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's stuff like that's happened. And when you ask about, the grays coming through the wall, that hasn't happened, but I'll tell you what has. And this has been, this was over from my through my 20s, throughout my 20s, and from my 30s into my mid 30s. And it hasn't happened like this since, because it seems to change, because the way it happens comes in segments, comes in waves, I should say, and sometimes it changes in the way that it happens. And so, but for a good, at least 10 years, here's what was happening was, when I knew this stuff was happening, I would be in bed, I'd get hit with paralysis, hadn't fallen asleep yet. Now, some of the listeners, I know you have a very intelligent listening base, listeners, but so sleep paralysis is a protection that our body puts out. There's a chemical that our body releases that shuts off our muscular function so we don't act out our dreams and hurt ourselves, such as the case with night terrors where people run through walls and they're sleepwalking and stuff. So it's a protection type of mechanism that we have, but that doesn't always explain it away. And because here I am, I'm here, I'm watching TV, or I'm going to go to bed, I lay down, and boom, I get hit with paralysis. But right before that, they're here again, and all of a sudden, boom, I get paralyzed. I hadn't fallen asleep. I didn't just wake up, I hadn't even fallen asleep yet. And so then I would end up blacking out, and I knew they were coming at me. I'd black out. Sometimes I would see a black mass, black shadow, and I think the reason for that is just because I'm a grown-up. I don't sleep with lights on, so I see shadows coming at me, just like we would. And, if there was a person walking at you in the dark, and I'd black out, and I'd wake up the next morning with this memory. But what started happening was whatever side of the bed I was on, I changed sides of the bed. I changed rooms in multiple different homes, and it didn't matter. I'm talking 3 different rooms in one house, 2 different rooms in another, and both all of those rooms had 2 different windows, and I slept by each window, and it didn't matter which window I slept next to. When all this stuff was happening, my blinds in a 16-inch diameter they were alabaster color, so off-white, would turn pink and start to wilt, and they would sag. They were melting, but they would turn pink in a 16-inch diameter and wilt. So this is the times when the windows closed. So nothing was coming through the window. I didn't see anything coming through the windows, but something was happening. Either I was being taken through the window, or something was coming in through the window. But I would replace these blinds. It would happen again. I would switch sides of the bed. It would happen to that side. I would switch rooms. It would happen only in that room, no other rooms. And so there was something to that. And now that I know, if that were to happen now, you can take a black light, and sometimes it'll fluoresce if there was some kind of weird activity. But it hasn't happened since my mid-30s that way. But now it's different when it happens. But so there's definitely something with that. And during that period too, there was a time where I had fell asleep on the couch, and I remember waking up, and I was wide awake. I wasn't no paralysis or nothing, and I was just looking at out the window, and all of a sudden, the brightest light you can imagine shining through. There's two windows in the living room, and all of a sudden, like a extremely bright light was shining in through the window. It's really late at night. It makes no sense, because of the way I lived in a cul-de-sac at the time. There was no way, even if a car was to be parked directly in front of my house, it wouldn't be this bright. It just extremely bright. And then all of a sudden, the loudest humming you've ever heard, and as well as shaking my house. I didn't know what was going on. I thought we're having an earthquake or something. But this loud humming was, and it was shaking my head. It was shaking my entire body. It was shaking the house. I swore we were having a earthquake. But as soon as I tried to get up, because I started to panic, we're having an earthquake or something's happening. I don't know what's going on. Paralysis hits me, and I can't get up. And this light is getting brighter, and the vibration is getting brighter, and everything goes black. And I wake up the next morning with blood in my nose. My eardrums were tickling, but also uncomfortable for the rest of that day. So if I was just to hallucinate this, my eardrums wouldn't have an effect, but they were affected by something. So it was audible. There was something that shook my eardrums to the point where they were uncomfortable and had a tickly, uncomfortable feeling for the rest of that day and partially the next day, as well as blood in my nose. Now,
how old were you when this was going on? When you were hearing these things, the pulsing sounds and all that.
This particular time I just described, I must have been around 28 years old.
Okay. Now, were you married at this point or still single? I mean, was there anybody living with you that noticed anything strange about you, your personality, or anything changing at all after these events been going on with you?
That was my first marriage, and didn't notice anything about me, but they did notice. They would see black figures or figures in the doorway of the bedroom, and only because it was dark. But they would see black shadows of people peering into the bedroom the same times where this stuff was happening to me at the same period, of time.
Well, how did you feel emotionally? Because, if that was happening to me, I tell you, I'd be would be nervous to go to sleep at night, let alone be by myself, because, a lot of these strange things that happen, like encounters, being abducted, usually happens like either in the car or, while you're sleeping, while your wife is next to you sleeping. Something happens where you're abducted and then return. But you've been lucky because, there's cases where people have been, abducted and not returned, or they've been abducted and returned in the wrong area of the house, or in cases where they've been abducted out of their car and, returned on the outside of their car while their car was locked in freezing weather. There's so crazy, accounts for all these abductions.
Yeah, this stuff, like I said, it started happening really strong when I was 7, and then in my early adulthood, so from the ages of like 18, 19, it really got crazy. I think a part of this too, that kind of like feeds into all this, I had a childhood illness at the age of 10 where I got really sick, and I couldn't hold down food or water. And my mother didn't have insurance at the time, so she was trying to not bring me in to the doctors, and hopefully I'd get better. That and her and my stepfather were preoccupied with other ventures, if you will. But I got weak, and I couldn't. I got to the point where I couldn't walk or move or whatever. And so they kind of put me in a room and and shut the door and kind of whatever. So I'm in there, can't move, and very uncomfortable. Because you're not eating or drinking, your body's basically eating itself. So I'm achy. I'm alone. I feel very much alone and horrible. And things started to happen. I was uncomfortable. I heard the wind blowing outside because we're going to have a thunderstorm. I could hear the thunder rolling in the background and the wind blowing.
I gotta pause you just for a second. I'm going to sign off of Facebook Live here because the first half an hour we're on Facebook Live. People out there, hey, continue on with this abduction story. Go to www